Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all members of the media present here with us at the Diplomatic Center, and those of you following us on the various platforms at home and abroad. Welcome to our regular weekend updating session where we'll deal with matters of national interest. Today, mainly, if not solely, the country's response to the pandemic. And without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Roshan Parasham, our CMO, to lead us off with the usual suite of data.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, members of the media, members of the viewing public, and members of the clinical team. So we start with the clinical update for September 22nd, 2021. Total persons tested to date at both public and private facilities, 341,430. Over the last 24 hours, we would have received 285 additional new positive cases, taking our total positive cases so far from 12th of March 2020 to 49,111. Those recovered so far, 43,597. A total active positive cases stand at 4,082. Those persons in home isolation, 3,445. Our deaths so far, 1,432. And as usual, condolences to the families of those who would have lost loved ones during the pandemic. Our total hospital occupancy, 283. Those in step-down, 69. And those in quarantine facilities, 110. Dr. Hines, as usual, will give us the EPI update, and Dr. Richards will go into more detail with regards to the hospital occupancy. Dr. Hines?
Thank you, CMO. Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers, colleagues, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public. The epidemiologic update for data as at September 22nd, 2021 is as follows. Looking at the epidemic curve, that is cases by date of actual swab collection, over the past 3 months, just about, from July, August, September, what we've been seeing is what we describe as a plateau. Approximately, or on average, similar numbers of cases being reported from day to day, and that is reflected in that dotted line rolling through the graph, and that dotted line hovers somewhere around the 200 mark. And the months of July, August, and September in this graph are demonstrated by the fuchsia, indigo, and brown colors. So we're seeing just about the same numbers of cases over about a 12-week period. If we go to the week by week, we have a better understanding of that week-by-week fluctuation. We see that the same months, represented by the same colors, have approximately equal, sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little lower, numbers of weekly aggregate cases. And over the last 7 weeks or so, what we've seen is fluctuations in both directions. 1 week, small percentage increase, next week, small percentage decrease, sometimes up to as far as 25% increase or decrease in either direction, but that's basically holding the average at about the same, approximately the same over the last 12 weeks or so. And the background color, that salmon color that we look at, is the positivity, and that's been holding in the range of 25 to 30% over that same time period. If we look at the monthly cases, we see that July and August had approximately the same numbers. We're 8 days out from the end of September, and at the current rate, we'll probably reach to somewhere in the vicinity of high 5,900s to 6,000 or so cases for the end of September, again holding with the plateau, similar numbers of cases from month to month, in the same way that they were similar from week to week and from day to day. And if we look at the positivity, we see that again it's fluctuated between 25 and 30%, even on the monthly time scale, over that time frame. These graphs demonstrate the demographics, that is the age and sex distribution of all the cases since we've had community spread. And what we've seen is a consistent pattern of the 25 to 49-year-old age group being in the majority, and the male and female ratio being almost 1-to-1, almost 50-50. What we note with the fatalities, however, is that older age groups predominate, the over 60s being now nearly 2/3, and the males being a little more prevalent than the females among those who have passed. But even that proportion has decreased from the 3-to-1 ratio to now basically 58% to 42% male to female. Of note, among these fatalities, we note that those with comorbidities, pre-existing illness, have had a higher risk of having an adverse outcome. And we also remind individuals that vaccination reduces that risk, and that we would like to encourage all persons, comorbidities or not, to make sure and get vaccinated to reduce your risk of having an adverse outcome. If you look at the geography, first by community, we see that there are some communities that have a little more activity than others across all of the various counties. So you have darker and lighter areas within each county. And if we look at this aggregated at a county level and compare counties from one week to the next, we see that there are some counties that have had increases and others that have had decreases, comparing one week with the next, in this case, Epi Week 35 in purple with Epi Week 36 in gold. And that combination of some up and some down has again contributed to the overall plateau. Not a big change or not a large trend in either direction of the weekly cases over the last 12 weeks or so. If we look at that 12-week period county by county, we see that some counties have had small decreases from week 25 to 6. Some have had variations both up and down. Some have had moderate increases in the last 4 weeks. But again, overall, similar numbers from week to week, some counties going up, some going down, contributing to that overall relatively steady number of cases we have been seeing over the time frame. And if you look at how we were performing at the start of July, the increase that we've begun to see, or the change from a decrease that we've begun to see, because we were seeing a decrease from May into June, and then from June into July, that trend changed, and it began to show what looked like it could have been an increasing tendency, which was demonstrated by the red dotted line. We have not stuck to that upward trend at that pace, so we have not met that red line with our blue cumulative bars, but we haven't fallen away significantly either. So again, sort of steady state, but not increasing at the rates that we were worried about at the start of July. So that brings me to the end of the EPI update. I'm going to turn you over to Dr. Richards for the clinical or the hospital update.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. Good afternoon, Honorable Prime Minister, the Honorable Minister of Health, Ministers of National Security, Energy, and the Office of the Prime Minister. Members of the media, members of the viewing and listening population, thank you very much for this opportunity to present on the clinical statistics of the parallel healthcare system as of 8 a.m. on September 23, 2021. This graph shows the net admissions, and that is the difference between the number of admissions and discharges at the hospitals and institutions in the parallel healthcare system. We would note that the gap between the orange and the green line continues to be quite narrow, and it shows a consistent number or consistently low number, additional number of persons being admitted to the parallel healthcare system over the past 6 to 8 weeks. We also examine the net admissions per week, and the actual number for this week, week 38, and we've gone 4 weeks into week 38, 4 days into week 38, is 72 compared to the entire week 37, which was 55. The net admissions are really due to the difference between the admissions and discharges in the hospital. And over the past week, we noticed an increasing number of admissions and a decreasing number of discharges, indicating that there is an increasing number of severely and critically ill patients in the institutions in the parallel healthcare system. We also review the actual number of patients who are hospitalized in the parallel healthcare system. And as of today, there are 355 patients across 16 facilities. And I'd like you to take note and to pay attention to a data point that we noticed this week. And we've noticed a data point where we've seen an increase over the last 3 days in terms of the number of persons in the parallel healthcare system. We've also noticed that the trend or the ratio between persons in the hospitals that care for the severely and critically ill patients as compared to those in step-down facilities has increased 4-to-1. And as of today, there are 288 patients across the 9 hospitals and 67 across the 7 step-down facilities. This indicates that we continue to have an increasing number of severely and critically ill patients. And this graph was just an expansion of the last graph, and it shows the uptick that we noted over the last 3 days. The overall occupancy of the parallel healthcare system is at 35%, and this has been a consistent trend of being under 40% since July 15th. If we were to separate the percentage occupancies in Trinidad and Tobago, Trinidad has been consistently under 40% again since July 15th. However, we've been noticing a variable trend in Tobago, and this morning Tobago's occupancy was at 41%. We also reviewed the capacity of the hospitals in the parallel healthcare system, and again there's been a consistent trend where only 1 of the 7 hospitals in Trinidad and Tobago has been above the 75% threshold, and that is the Augustus Long Hospital, which is at 81% occupancy this morning. We also look at the breakdown by levels of care with respect to occupancy in our hospitals, and the ward occupancy in Trinidad and Tobago is at 33%. However, we are concerned of the continued high occupancy in the ICU, which on average has been 80%. That is 8 out of 10 of our ICU beds continue to be filled. HDU, or high dependency unit, which is the middle or the transition level of care between the ward and the ICU, is at 29%, but over the past month, the average has been 57%. So that has been a variable percentage occupancy. Lastly, we review as an indicator the number of persons or patients presenting to the accident and emergency at 8 a.m. every morning across the traditional healthcare system that require transfers into a COVID-19 facility in the parallel healthcare system. And this number has been consistently low, which is a good indicator, and we have noticed this trend from on about the 15th of July. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I would like to reiterate 3 main points from this presentation. Firstly, there is now the presence of the Delta variant, which of course can lead to increased hospitalizations. Secondly, we continue to notice pediatric cases being admitted into the parallel healthcare system. And thirdly, we have noticed an uptick or a data point over the last 3 days. It is important for you to please vaccinate today and don't delay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Drs. Hines and Richard, and CMO Parasuram. Thank you all for your presentation. I would like to reflect at this time where we are, what we said we were going to do in the context of where we came from. Permit me a minute to take us all back to the beginning of this journey. In January, or just before January in some parts of the world, 2020, when the WHO, the World Health Organization, advised countries, mainly governments, that we were facing a problem which was spreading through China and coming westwards towards us, through Europe and elsewhere. At that time, we knew it wasn't anything good. We knew it was something dangerous, and it had the potential to sweep across us all, whoever we are, because we had the experience of SARS, if you may recall, and then more recently we had MERS, but SARS didn't get very far. MERS was geographically located, but now we were being told that novel coronavirus 19 is approaching and very quickly earning the distinction of a pandemic. Up to that point, we knew that we had to do something, but what was that something? frankly, it was an ignorant world, except for a few laboratories that were studying coronavirus, which is the pool of virus in which the normal common cold can be found. It's a general group. And one or two places in the world, and one or two scientists in the world had, over the years, been studying the mutations and the behavior of these viruses, and had a head start as to what they were capable of and what their shape and size were and so on. But the rest of us, particularly governments, really were caught into the description of novel coronavirus. It was something brand new, as a virus which had not been known to be in the human population before, and that had consequences. How did we respond to that at that time? The response was very quickly to sanitize, because if the virus exists on one person who is clinically showing negative responses, you may be picking it up off surfaces or wherever, so keep your hygiene high. Wash hands, that's where the washing came from. Use the alcohol-based sanitizers, and normally rush for sanitizers. And most importantly, how does it get into the body? Initially, it was thought that it was being put into the body by the dirty hands, taking it up to your orifices, your nose and your mouth. And remember, from this platform, we were being told regularly, like the rest of the world, keep your hands off your face, don't touch your face, because that was the big danger we were facing. And imagine, look back now, that was the biggest response we had to this dangerous virus. Don't touch your face, wash your hands. It took a few weeks for it to be determined by the scientists that the virus was in fact being spread as aerosols, not you picking it up only from somewhere and putting it into your nose or your mouth, but simply by breathing it out or talking it out in droplets, that was one of the fastest ways of being spread. Now, even then, the question was, how do we protect ourselves, and in what zone was that aerosol active, and how far can it travel from an infected person? And you may recall, masks were being seen on television being worn widely in Europe, in Korea, in China. And here in Trinidad and Tobago, the only person who was systematically and diligently wearing a mask, it was Sean Douglas. In this very room. And some of his colleagues were saying, Sean is chicken. He just likes the fashion. But eventually, the scientists were able to tell us by testing how these aerosols were operating and what dangers we were facing. And it moved from, we added, instead, keep on washing your hands, not touching your face, get your sanitizing liquids or whatever you're using. Please wear a mask. And many people were not wearing the mask. But the mask was seen to be effective. And the government eventually had to make the mask mandatory in a public place, and encouraging people, even in your own private space, if you are able to wear the mask, especially if you are around older people, please do. Because by then, we were seeing that the older people in the population, especially those who had comorbidities, they were the ones who were falling prey to this virus. So over a few months, we were learning more and more about the virus and what to do to respond to it. And by the time we got to our first impression that it was spreading from person to person, and in fact could be devastating, we stayed inside. Our first lockdown was staying inside to prevent it from moving from person to person. But as we got to know a bit more about it, we were able to say, if you come outside and you did certain things, the level of risk would be reduced. And we started now adding, alongside the mask, the distancing, because the tests were showing how far from a person your safe perimeter would be. So we had that, and that remains with us. So today, we're still talking and exhorting you for high levels of hygiene, keep sanitizing, have your sanitizer with you, sanitize frequently, touch surfaces, and so on. And wear the mask, and stay at a certain distance, if you can, away from persons around you, and assume that everybody is carrying it, because by now everybody is exposed to it. There is no exclusion of any person. As long as you are a human being, you are a potential host and carrier of this virus. So those protocols remain with us. But by the time we got to the end of 2020, the question of vaccination, we had made some significant progress, because by the middle of the year, we were being told, 2020, that there were businesses and governments who were looking for a vaccine, developing a vaccine, testing it, and trying to take us to a position where vaccines can be available. By the end of 2020, we were getting the news from universities and governments around the world who had been successful, indicating that they had in fact developed in the laboratories and wherever else they've been working and testing in populations in different parts of the world, various vaccines which could stimulate the human body to respond to the virus if that body is infected. So the story now became vaccines. We exhaled, vaccines are possible. Because until we got that news from the University of Oxford and elsewhere that vaccines were efficacious, vaccines were not yet possible. But when it became possible, the issue moved now from what I just mentioned, that suite of protocol actions, to vaccines. If we get vaccinated, then we can make it difficult for the virus to throw us down and to kill us. So get vaccines. Okay. By the time we were in the early part of January of 2021, vaccines were available. There were about 2 or 3 companies in countries making vaccines. But as a country and part of CARICOM, we were part of the vaccine apartheid victims. So even though we knew vaccines were available, even though we saw and heard other countries vaccinating their populations to a high level and aiming to vaccinate tens of millions of people, we here in this part of the world could not get our hands on an adequate supply of vaccines, even though we had made arrangements through the COVAX to get at least 20% of our population vaccinated early in the program, on prices negotiated, on vaccines developed with our money and other people's money, because we all had to pay into that program to get that vaccine developed. But once the vaccine became available, the world became what it always is, which is the rich took and the poor didn't get. And in January of 2021, CARICOM addressed this issue frontally. And fortunately at the time, I could tell you without fear of contradiction, because Trinidad and Tobago was in the chair of CARICOM. And between January and March, this issue of how do we get vaccines, because vaccines are possible, vaccines are available, but not to us. And you may recall the behavior of some people in this country demanding that we vaccinate the population, because that is the only way out. Vaccinate the population. We now know that. We are a long way from touching your face and washing your hand. It is vaccination that will get us out of this situation. But vaccines were not available. As a matter of fact, I actually commented from this very podium that it is possible that if we become over-anxious in attempting to get vaccines, especially from those who were not dealing upfront with us and not dealing with anybody but governments and not dealing with small governments, small countries, that it is possible that we could fall into the hands of charlatans who pretend to have access to these precious vaccines. And be careful. The world is full of trickery. Unfortunately, some of our friends and colleagues have fallen into that in the desperation to get vaccines. Trinidad and Tobago has avoided that. We were berated when we took the position, one, that we will only use on our population vaccines that carry the stamp of approval for emergency use by the WHO, because we know that that approval level gives us a comfort that what we're using on our population would have passed through the rigors of scientific and medical tests and approval. Of course, we could have done differently, but as a government, we took that position, and that position remains. All the vaccines that have been allowed to come into this country and to be utilized. If it did come in, as 2000 came in before the approval, we held it until the approval was in fact available before we used it. And that's government policy. It remains that way. And it also remains that vaccination was the pathway out of dealing with the threat and the challenges brought by the virus. So we did that. And today, we are a long way from the touching face response to the vaccination response. And we are one of the few countries in the developing world that could say that we have vaccines for our population on request. If they need to be vaccinated, vaccines are available. At some times, we had one type, other types became available because we sourced vaccines from all WHO-approved sites. We have vaccines from Asia, we have vaccines from Europe, we have vaccines from the United States, and we said to you as a population, don't go trying to be brand specific unless your doctors tell you that this particular brand is what your medical condition can tolerate. Because we do accept, and I want to repeat that, we do accept that there are people for whom vaccination is more than a choice to fight the virus. It is how it goes with my present condition. And my personal condition, I'm one of those. Because you may recall, I did not get vaccinated when vaccines became immediately available. Right? Because I have a medical condition which had to be assessed to determine which of the type of vaccine more suit my condition. And there are many people in the country, I don't know if it's 1,000, 10,000 dollars, and that is respected. And we continue to respect that. And of course, we have to wait because this thing is occurring all over the world. So information is coming to the central sites from all over the world. And it is the analysis of that pool of data that gives us the comfort, knowing that WHO is harvesting all that data, all the analyses, reading all the volumes, interacting, going to the various preparation zones, going to the factories, ensuring that the infrastructure is there, that the methodology is right, that the data sets and the conclusions drawn are scientifically sound. So when WHO puts their approval, we can do no better. So that's where we are at. That's the road traveled. Today is a few weeks after I told you that if we are able to maintain the level that Dr. Hines has been putting to us every week, we know we are infected as a population. We know that we have coronavirus in the country, but we know we have to continue living. And we're living with it. But we said, if we are able to not become worse than what we were in July, going into August, because the vaccination program started in real in about May, June, or thereabouts, June. And we said we have enough vaccine to take us through part of July. But then from August going forward, we'll have enough vaccines to keep us well on target towards some destination called herd immunity. Unfortunately, we were able to do that. August and September, we received and have in possession enough vaccines to take us well towards the vaccination of 600,000 people or more. I think the last time I checked with the minister, we had in hand approximately 700 doses of vaccines. That's 350,000 people who can be vaccinated now if they want to be vaccinated. And if you add that to what we've done so far, the approximately 400, you're talking.
564 with full dose.
Well, I'm talking about fully vaccinated.
473.
Right. So if we do 350 plus the 475, you see what I'm talking about? Approximately 800,000 people. If we managed to have vaccinated that, we would have been sitting pretty. But that is providing you accept the scientific position that the vaccinated persons have a very good chance of performing very well in the face of a rampaging virus. And the corollary is the unvaccinated persons are the ones who are largely being knocked down by the virus. You draw your own conclusions as to how well we have done or how well we could have done if we had stuck to the program as we did, starting with don't touch your face, wear a mask, have physical distancing, and of course we had our border closed for a year now. All of these things step by step. The one thing we are not doing properly, and I see it being interpreted as bullying, I see it being interpreted as taking away rights, I see it being interpreted as standing between man and God and taking away a license to walk into heaven. All of that I've seen. But the long and short of it is that this is the one thing that we are not doing fully, or as fully. And surprisingly so, because we didn't tell ourselves that the washing of the hands and the not touching the face and the wearing of the mask would have taken us out of the pandemic. That was just a holding situation. But we did know that from a clinical standpoint, with respect to a trip to the hospital, a trip to the ICU, a possibility of being on a ventilator, and finally, death. We did know, and we do know, that the vaccine offers that. And surprisingly, a significant portion of the population that panicked when we were ignorant of the biology of this virus and the physiology of the human being in responding to it, that same population of people has now many experts who are more experts than Dr. Hines, than Dr. Parasram, and the WHO. Because all other kinds of flotsam and jetsam now on board in managing COVID. And people are making decisions. And I would say in Trinidad and Tobago, our national policy has been to let the population make that decision, persuaded by gentle law enforcement. And if you don't believe me, just look at the CARICOM region. Look at what other CARICOM populations are having to face. Because my colleague governments with whom I'm in touch all the time, some of them have taken draconian measures, and by Trinidad and Tobago standards, dictatorial measures. But you see, a population is governed by its culture, whether it's Afghanistan, the United States, Antigua, or Trinidad and Tobago. I have every confidence that I'm right if I take the position as a government, to lead a government, to take some of the steps that are taken by our CARICOM colleagues, by our Commonwealth colleagues. I monitor Australia very closely. Very firm action is taken in Australia. Canada, very firm action. If some of those actions were taken in Trinidad and Tobago, we will not get the same result, because the population will be managed in a different way by the general national leadership. And national leadership, I mean, as I said before from this platform, is anybody and everybody who influencing anybody else. So we have managed the virus largely on encouraging the population to take responsibility for your person, guided by general government policy. So we said, if we follow the protocols, if we get vaccinated, come early October, we will, as part of our ongoing cautious reopening of our activities, we will, in early October, bring out to school our 4th, 5th, and 6th formers. And to do that, we made every effort to have them enjoy the protection of the vaccination program. When I said that to you for the first time, we did not have any vaccines that were approved for children in our hand. But that vaccine was available in the United States. I can tell you we worked night and day. I stopped counting the number of meetings we had with US officials and Pfizer officials. and the number of documents I've had to sign. And we did that with the full knowledge that if we get a supply of Pfizer vaccines, that vaccine being the only one approved for youngsters from age 12 upwards, if we get that, we can vaccinate those children and give them what they have been deprived of for the last year and a half, which is that part of their education which they can only get at the schoolhouse. I did not tell you how concerned certain specialties are in medicine, talking about not just the physical, but the mental side of the strain of the COVID on people who have had to change their way of living. And school children, young children in particular, not being able to go to school. They are experiencing a deprivation which is as important as the deprivation of loss of job, loss of business, loss of whatever. That is a significant loss. And we said, if we get that vaccine, we will use it on our children and allow them to not be battened down and beaten down by the virus. They'll be able to go to school with a significant armor of protection. So we did. We did get in a timely manner Pfizer vaccines, and we started to vaccinate our children. As I said a while ago, surprisingly, maybe not so, we are not anywhere near the target that we had set. Because what I said initially was that if we can vaccinate the majority of our children, that cohort of children who don't only live in school, they live at home and in their communities not going to school. But the going to school aspect that we are trying to add, we said that level of protection would be there for the benefit of them being able to be going to school. And if we had got a high level of vaccination in that cohort of the population, that school population that we identified, even though some of them were not vaccinated, let's say 15, 20% of them were not vaccinated, we could have not make that an issue because the general school population would have been 70, 80% vaccinated. And in that kind of concentration of vaccinated people, the virus would have been losing the war there. Unfortunately, instead of vaccinating, let's say, 60, 70,000 students, I can report to you today, we vaccinated 39,000 students. And some people who should be helping us with this program to get the children vaccinated, spread the word, the good word, to those who will be influenced by you, to get the children vaccinated so that they could benefit from a schooling at the schoolhouse. We're being told, let what has been going on continue indefinitely. Today I can tell you the government has rejected that advice, and the government stays with its original position. We've worked towards it, we've worked for it, and we want to benefit by it. Those 39,000 students, as they become fully vaccinated, which is 2 weeks after their second shot, school will open for all practitioners and participants at the schoolhouse. School will open on October 4th for Forms 4, 5, and 6 to be fully attended in the curriculum of those forms. And for those students who are not fully vaccinated, they will not be allowed to participate on the school compound, but we'll make alternative arrangements for them to participate in schooling in the virtual way. These are decisions not by anybody bullying anybody, but by free choice. You can't have a freer choice than that. And it's being done in an environment of luxury where the vaccines approved for children are available in Trinidad and Tobago. And the vaccines come in a program of preparation. And that is where the Minister of Education will take responsibility for this. And as students become more and more vaccinated, if they are to be they will join their colleagues at the schoolhouse. And the same thing applies to parents who, if they're not vaccinated today, and tomorrow they want to be vaccinated, and the vaccines are available, then they get vaccinated. The trouble with the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, is that it expires. The batch we have in our hand initially was supposed to expire in November. But by virtue of the tests that have been going on and the examination, it has been shown that the vaccine is still efficacious well beyond the 3-month period, and it is recommended for use for another few months. So that is good news. It means that the vaccines we have in hand will not be dumped after November. Because look at our predicament. Having spent all of April and May and June fighting for these particular vaccines for this population of students, we got 300 and odd thousand, I think 307,000, I think it was, out of an offering of 900,000. We therefore were in line to ask for and receive another 600,000 Pfizer vaccines. But look at my predicament. If we allow the vaccines that we got in the first tranche to not be utilized and to be wasted, do you really see success in going back to the Americans and saying, since we've wasted the last batch you've given us, and we had to dump half of it, could you give us some more, please, like Oliver Twist? Could you see that? Or could you see a door that was open to take us out of the pandemic? Worse ravages being shut in our face and saying that really, you are not serious. There are other people around the world. There are some countries that are reporting a 3% vaccination at this point in time. There are some countries that are reporting 7%, 15%. We are reporting at this time 39%?
33.8%.
Fully. And in terms of first dose, 40, right. So when you look at that, we at that and causing vaccines to expire from donors, not even what we bought. This is donor vaccination. I could tell you that the CARICOM called for an international conference on vaccine distribution that was made, I think it was in February, either January or February of this year. That conference took place on, was it yesterday? It was yesterday. It was initiated by President Biden, and it was chaired by him, and a lot of influential world agencies, the WHO, the United Nations, the vaccine-producing countries, the countries that would be producing vaccines in the not-too-distant future. We had a long meeting, not too long, but very long enough. And at that meeting, certain commitments were made by the United States, which has come to the fore now in responding to the requirement for sharing. I think the program is every vaccine used in the United States now, they'll give away 3. That's what where we're at. And monies have now been put aside by the United States to fight vaccine hesitancy, because that is now a public health issue. $300 million is to be spent on dealing in very many ways this whole question of persons rejecting the vaccine. And here in Trinidad and Tobago, we know what that is. It is not that you're going to give people money to change their mind. It is to encourage them to understand the only known response. Maybe sometime in the not too distant future, something else might come up that might make vaccines not the way to go. But right now, with the virus killing people worldwide and vaccines giving us a breathing space and some relief, that is the way to go. I mean, early in the proceedings, the question is, if you're sick, you require medication. What is the medication? It has to be one that brings some relief or some removal of your condition. So you take pills, you take injections for all ranges of ailments. This virus had no known medication that we could use. Initially, there was the talk about using something called hydroxychloroquine. That the WHO has said is not to be utilized because it is not efficacious and it's also dangerous to some people. And in the search for medication, we reach as far as bleach. And now we are at ivermectin, which is animal medication for internal parasites. It may very well be that what was good for use on endoparasites, in fact, is good for fighting COVID-19, but the WHO has said it is not. In fact, there was one place in Texas, I think it was that, one town in Texas, where there were more people turning up in the hospital having poisoned themselves with ivermectin than people turning up for treatment for COVID-19. In a developed country like the United States, that was happening. But again, I am not to tell you that maybe there's nothing to it, I don't know. But we, as a country, we will follow the WHO guidelines because then we know that we're following sound medical guidelines, some scientific approaches. I had a friend who played tennis with me when I was a tennis player in my youth. And she always had a routine before she went on the court. She was an elderly lady, very prominent tennis player. And she used to always come to the court with a tin of WD-40. And she will always spray her knees with WD-40. And she swore by it that it worked. And if she says it's working, it's working. Because she used WD-40 on her joints. I don't know that WD-40 will get any certification from the WHO. Right? But to come to this question of, rights and privileges and choice. Last night, I saw a friend of the Minister of Health, who is a pastor in a church, with a following, accusing the government of genocide because we have not used ivermectin in our hospitals on patients. Genocide. And went on to give the personal experience that he and his family had COVID and they used ivermectin. And ivermectin worked because they didn't die, they didn't come down worse with worse illness. I simply want to say to the population, I put that in the same category as WD-40. It will not get certification unless it has been proven to be clinically sound, but that is all part of the process. But in terms of encouraging people to use the vaccination program as our way out, the head of virtually all ecclesiastical bodies in this country, the heads have come out. We had the bishop, the archbishop, Maulanas, parish leaders and so on. They've all come out and said to our population in 2021, we should get vaccinated because there are benefits. Scientifically, Dr. Parasam himself and his team would have told you, they are your scientists, they are your doctors. They've told you 99 or 92 or whatever percentage, 90-odd% of the people in our hospitals looking for care are unvaccinated people. So those who are taking the choice of being unvaccinated, that is the pathway that you are choosing. So you're making that choice. So there's no dictator and no bullying. In Trinidad and Tobago, we are managing COVID by choice, including choice of sending your children to school or keeping them home. Choice. We have it in abundance. Last fortnight, we said that we will move towards operating our food service business places and places of entertainment as safe zones, meaning we will provide approval for restaurants, cinemas, bars that have restaurant service, entertainment places, Napa, Sapa, Queens Hall, places like that, to be utilized by the population, but by the vaccinated population. Choice. If you are vaccinated, these facilities will be available to you. And of course, there has to be some element of confirmation that you are so. I would like to ask Minister Young in the Office of the Prime Minister to give a little more detail on that aspect and preparation, which is to come into force on the 11th of October, Monday 11th October. This comes into force. Preparations will be made, that all the legal considerations will be covered, and of course, so schools open on the 4th for vaccinated children to be serviced by all those on the government payroll who are to service these children. And the following Monday, food services and entertainment areas reopen to a vaccinated population. We have more than, but we are aiming to have in very short order, more than 500,000 people in this country who can function in those areas, and that would be good for the economy. It would be good for all of us. So, Minister Young, could you just go in a little detail on that, please?
Yes, Prime Minister, thank you. Good afternoon, Prime Minister, my ministerial colleagues, doctors, members of the media, viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. As the Prime Minister said a few weeks ago, it was actually in Tobago, he announced that we were looking at the introduction and rollout of TT safe zones, which is available to fully vaccinated persons. The details are as follows. They're going to be applicable, as the Prime Minister said, all things remaining equal. From the 11th of October, cinemas and theatres, the theatres including, as the Prime Minister said, Napa, Sapa, Queen's Hall, those areas, casinos and betting shops, bars and restaurants, gyms and fitness centres and those types of things, studios, to fully vaccinated persons over the age of 12. So, of course, it now applies to only those who are fully vaccinated. As we know, WHO has only approved the vaccinations for those over the age of 12. Dr. Parasaram and his team, the CMO, has told us that there are certain applications before WHO. Hopefully, they'll be approved for under 12 within the next couple of months. But right now, this is applicable to fully vaccinated persons over the age of 12. And in these safe zones that I've just categorized, the owners of these safe zones are required to make sure that all of the employees operating in these safe zones, so for example, use a restaurant and a bar, all of the employees are fully vaccinated. They will also be required to have proof of vaccination of all of the employees operating in the safe zone on the premises. The patrons in these premises can only be fully vaccinated people who will be required to walk with proof of vaccination, their physical vaccination cards, to provide it to the enforcement officers. At this time, we're looking at the enforcement officers being the police service and public health officers. Now, the owners of these establishments will be carrying the liability for, one, ensuring all of their employees are fully vaccinated. That's what creates the safe zone inside. And this is, of course, for dining and other entertainment in their establishments. And then two, they are going to be required to ensure that the persons patronizing their establishments, their customers, also are fully vaccinated. What is being developed out of the Ministry of Health is basically a poster that will be provided via a schedule to the public health regulations, setting out to the public that my establishment is a safe zone. Everyone here, all of my employees are fully vaccinated, and I take that responsibility. And if it is found that by the enforcement officers, their employees are not fully vaccinated, the owner of the establishment will be subject to a fine that we're working out now. And we're also looking at a tiered penalty system along the lines of, for the first infraction, you're suspended for a while. The second, maybe another suspension. And then the third, you're basically closed off from being a safe zone. And you may have to revert to, for example, only takeout service. Also, in the first instance with the bars and restaurants, because it is going to be a big rollout, there will be no consumption of alcohol on the premises. So the bars and restaurants, you're free to serve food, you're free to serve soft drinks, etc. This is in the first instance because we want to get people back out. Additionally, we're looking at 50% capacity again in the first instance. So 50% capacity at your cinemas, theaters, your casinos, betting shops, bars, restaurants, the gyms and fitness centers. As I said, the main thing will be to put that liability on you if you're calling yourself a safe zone to make sure your employees and your patrons are fully vaccinated. The details of this, Prime Minister, meaning the law, etc., are being worked out, and we have time until the 11th of October, where we will then be presenting how this sticker should look, what it means, what are the fines that you would attract if you break this fully vaccinated requirement that is being put on you. I think that's, at this stage, that covers all that we need to say at this stage.
Thank you very much, Minister Young. I just want to say, because I'm hearing a response, that this is something that it is not. It is new and oppressive. I just want to remind those who are likely to go down that road. One, this model of response in the pandemic to the virus is a model which has already been in use. For example, it's common to go here in Trinidad and Tobago and elsewhere in the world, especially where law enforcement is paramount, to see a system where alcohol being sold to minors is a no-no, and those who sell alcohol to people, the onus is on them not to do so, and there are penalties for doing that. And also we have the system where cinema movies are graded and rated, and if you are below a certain age at a cinema, you can be turned away because you are not qualified by age to view the offering in the cinema. So that model is already in place, and we are using that model to treat with the virus, which is now even more of a concern than what movie you watch or what drink you may drink as an underage person. This is a matter of life and death, and the model is adopted here. I also should tell you that as we relax, we would, starting from Monday, the curfew would be shifted from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And hopefully, as we look at the response of the population in the face of all these changes, we would want to take it a bit further if the circumstances warrant, and of course the state of emergency is with us while it is useful. So Monday is the 27th of September. The holiday is Friday, the weekend. So we start, as we have been doing, cautiously on the Monday and go into. So from Monday next week, the nighttime curfew begins at 10 o'clock. So you would see that. I would like to stop at this point and leave it to the media to ask the relevant questions where we can amplify some of these points that we've raised. So it's open to the media now. Yes, Renuka.
Mr. Renuka Singh from the Trinidad Guardian. The parents who took the opportunity to get their kids vaccinated will now have them participating in in-person attendance in the school. Will they be met with vaccinated teachers?
Well, we took a lot of time, put a lot of effort, and made a lot of resources available to the teaching population. I don't have a figure. I don't even think the minister has a figure because we have not counted heads. But what we do know is that very many teachers are vaccinated and quite a few are not. And we don't want to get into a situation where we spend the valuable teaching time for these students fighting over vaccine enforcement for teachers. What we have done, though, is to ensure that the students who will be exposed to that population of teachers, vaccinated or unvaccinated, that those students have the added protection of being vaccinated themselves. So the protection is not in the vaccinated teacher, the protection is in the vaccinated student. And that protection, whether they're on the way to school, they're in the bus, in the taxi, we focus on them. And we expect that teachers would be responsible in protecting not only themselves and their own personal interests, because sometimes when you listen to the conversation, you get the impression that some of these people, quite rightly, are concerned about themselves, but sometimes only themselves. In this matter, our response to this virus is not only about yourself, it's about other people. The state is moving every stone in the way to ensure that our students are given whatever protection they can get. And of course, they will interact with teachers, with their caretakers, with the taxi drivers, and so on, in a population that is heavily vaccinated, even though not vaccinated to the level that we had anticipated.
Good afternoon, Urvashi from TV6. With regard
And before I answer your question, I want to put at this point, I'm being reminded by my colleague, the Minister of Health here, that mask wearing would be a must, except when you're eating and drinking in the schoolyard. The children will go out in masks, and of course, the teachers who will teach them and be face-to-face with them would also expect to be masked, as the rest of the population is masked. So being away from home, you're masked.
Mr. Prime Minister, good afternoon again, Urvashi from TV6. As it relates to these safe zones, a lot of these areas, these cinemas, theaters, restaurants, gyms, even though it's for fully vaccinated people, we would expect where eating and drinking is concerned that the masks will be off. Is this of any concern to you? Despite them being fully vaccinated, we know Delta is in the community.
We anticipate that they will take off the mask to eat or to drink. So that's factored into it. You go into the cinema, you buy some popcorn, you go to the wherever. So we are a population of sensible human beings. We're big and we have sense. You're wearing the mask for a purpose. But if you have to drink, you take it off, and if you drink it, you put it back on. Right? And if you are fully vaccinated, the risk has, we have reduced that risk. All that we've done about expecting vaccine, getting vaccine, vaccinating you, we can now come and do this because having used the vaccine, it has provided a certain level of protection. And that protection is the spreading of the virus is reduced because your viral load is lower. And of course, if you do get infected, your response is much better than if you're unvaccinated. So it's as I said earlier on, and many times, it's all about managing levels of risk.
Is there any
Sean.
Good day, Prime Minister. Is there any possibility of a constitutional challenge to the idea of a TNT safe zone in the cinema owners say, well, this is my enjoyment of property, or under the Equal Opportunities Act, somebody might say, well, there's unequal employment. I see you have a minister.
And I expect that would be a very interesting development in the court. What we do enjoy now is an equal opportunity of getting infected and an equal opportunity of ending up by Simpson. So if that is where we're heading, then so be it. But I tell you one thing, the corollary to that is maintain the status quo. And the answer is no. We are not maintaining the status quo. We are in a pandemic. We want to have a livelihood in a pandemic, and certain things are scientifically possible and proven, and if they could prove in the court that we are being unreasonable, taking action that is not warranted in a society that has a reasonable respect for life, limb, and whatever else, then that's a matter for the court.
I have another question, actually, a kind of, well, there was the Guardian had done a story about the possibility of this vaccine influencing the female monthly cycle, and
not you. Dr. Parasam, can you take that question? I know, given half a chance, you want to answer that one.
No, I think Dr. Sylvia Singh, who's our Director of Women's Health, would have dealt with that at length at yesterday's press conference. I don't want to go back. Go ahead.
If people have a concern, is there any specialist group of doctors, like a hotline, that they can, or that they can actually visit? And this could be before or after,
Right.
like before taking the vaccine? Because remember, people are different, their
Of course,
bodies
yeah.
are different. So I think because this is a thing that has been raised, and there are serious, but people...
Yeah, I think the general advice, in terms of any adverse reaction or any side effect, is to consult with your primary physician. And of course, for this particular concern, you would want to seek advice from an obstetrician and gynecologist, that's specialty. And of course, there could be a referral pathway there. We do have a Directorate of Women's Health at the Ministry who is in constant contact with all of the heads of department across the country. So through that department of the Ministry, again, you can send your complaints in and we can get you to one of those specialists.
Is there like, I think yesterday it was mentioned, in fact I think it's Minister said that the hospitals have a reporting system, but in terms of the VEYES, is it for individual people? I'm not sure if VEYES is a US or a...
ESAV, yeah, it's a slightly different system, but it's almost the same. We call it ESAVI under the PAHO system.
Right,
So
but my question would be for individuals. Now, even though these are subjective assessments, well, I'm feeling out of the ordinary for this month of my cycle, is there that direct interaction that the individual can have, a reporting?
Yeah, the direct interaction that we have always asked is, of course, visit either your private physician or your nearest health center in the first instance, and we do have the 877 well number, which has been used from the start of COVID. They can call into that number and they will direct you to the necessary area so that you seek care according to which specialty you have to deal with. Okay?
Okay.
Sure.
Yes, Sebastian.
Mr. Prime Minister, with regards to employers at these safe zones, what legal reference or how will they tell unvaccinated employees now that they are now without a job? And what about that unvaccinated employee who's without a job?
Well, every person to whom a vaccine was administered would have been issued a vaccination card. So all persons who were vaccinated ought to be able to demonstrate that to any employer or any examiner like a police officer or a public health officer. If a person has not been vaccinated, well then the absence of a vaccination card to prove that shouldn't be too difficult. You have not been vaccinated, you haven't got a card. Because what we're doing is using what is available to determine how best to manage the current environment, get out, get these businesses operating, get these services delivered while enjoying the benefit of what we know would work for us in allowing us to be out with a virus around. Because remember, the virus is still there. And the alternative is to stay in, stay home, and that has a whole suite of negatives that go with it. So to evade those negatives, we come this way and in a reducing risk environment.
No, I think what I really want to ask is how does an employer tell his unvaccinated employee, listen, you're without a job, you can't, we have no place to
I can't answer that for the employer. The government is an employer. In fact, the government is the largest employer in the country. We have not today assigned that to government employees. But if it becomes necessary, we will. The government has taken up a whole lot of the response to the virus. For example, all government employees have got their full emoluments during this pandemic. People who were in the private sector, where the owners of the businesses or businesses just couldn't carry the burden, many persons have lost their jobs. But what we did is to make sure that the population got its means of survival with the government carrying, on the taxpayer expense, a huge burden. And it's the same thing here. To get more activity in the country, especially to those persons who have been carrying the burden of the shutdown, give them an opportunity to conduct their businesses, because we now know that it is possible to reduce the risk through the vaccination program. And as we bring more and more people out, it is possible that a few more persons will get infected, because the more people are out and the more they are active, the biology of the virus is such that we expect some people to be infected, but we are hoping and we are anticipating that persons will see that exposure and say, well, that infection that I'm exposed to, I can ameliorate it with a vaccine. Get vaccinated. That's what the inoculation program is about. And if there are people who say that I am not doing it because of Bill Gates and because of Pastor and Jehoshaphat and the Bible, if you choose that, there are consequences to your choice. And I think it is unfair to those persons who have taken the guidelines, follow the national policy, and then not be able to get the benefit of it. So I know, and you know, and we all know, that what Minister Young has just outlined will not work for everybody. But it will work for very many people, I would say most people. Yes. Could you identify yourself to me, please?
TTT News.
Sorry, I didn't recognize you behind the mask.
In the recent past, we would have seen, some fraudulent vaccination cards. Is this any concern? Because persons would have to present their vaccination cards. And secondly, in the early days, persons were told to carry their original cards and have the original vaccine cards, that is, before the white ones, and to have the information added on this. Would this be accepted, or will persons have to get that new card?
While Mr. Young is going to report, let me answer the first one. The first question was?
The fraudulent vaccine.
Oh, fraudulent. No, we are not inventing any wheels here. On the law books of Trinidad and Tobago today, predating COVID-19, if you, for good reason, falsify a document in any way or present a document which is not carrying the proper certification of the CMO and the health department, that can have serious consequences in you representing yourself to be what you are not, which is a vaccinated person when you are not. And there are serious penalties and consequences to that, and that remains in force.
Prime Minister,
let me just say one thing, please. This will give us a golden opportunity now when we go out to check cards to cross-reference that to our database and catch these persons. So this is a wonderful opportunity to catch those persons.
I will want, at this point, since you've asked this very important question, I would want to make it quite clear to every citizen in this country, if you are in fact thinking about falsifying and fabricating vaccination cards, it's possible you can do it. But just remember that you are committing a very serious crime for which the penalties are huge. And if you are prepared to accept such a card from a person who is not authorized by the health department, you too understand that you're committing a serious crime, and if you're caught, the penalties are huge. So I appeal to the population, don't get involved in producing or using falsified cards which are purporting to demonstrate your vaccination status, which is different to the truth.
So, Prime Minister, just to add to what yourself and Minister Dayal Singh have said, we're looking at increasing the fines that would be attracted to anyone found with any false vaccination card or, in fact, purporting to be vaccinated when they're not. That's the first step, because we recognize there may be people who are always trying to beat the system, as we know. The second thing is the Ministry of Health, along with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, have been working towards us being able to roll out, hopefully in the not too distant future, what you would have seen away, which is these digital vaccination, proof of vaccination. It may be a QR code. Right now we're looking at both a QR code as well as other information on a piece of paper. And the persons at the establishments would have the ability to scan it. And that is a verified process. So right now the data entry is taking place. The software is available. The Minister of Digital Transformation and the Minister of Health are working on it. And we hope to be able to roll out that, Prime Minister, in the next, I would hope, 4 to 6 weeks.
The second question, for persons who have their original vaccine cards with the vaccine information in it, do they have to get a new card?
No, you can use those hard copies. That's fine.
My question question would be a question on the remit of this press conference, if it's only for COVID issues or if there's any other issue that could be raised.
You can raise whatever you want. The only problem we have... let me just answer Sean's question. It is not the range of questions. It is the time allotted for questions.
Okay.
So it is now 20 past 2, and I'm aiming that we'll finish this certainly by 3 o'clock. Yes, Vashi, your question.
As it relates to safe zones, again, like my phone is blowing up. So many people want to know if you could create a safe zone for the beach, for instance, for national athletes are calling. They want to get back to train, team sports, and so on.
Well, if you were a fly on the wall in the health meeting we had today, those two issues came up, and we are hoping, given the opening up that we're doing now, in 2 weeks' time, because you know we usually watch 2 weeks to see what the effect of the opening up is. In 2 weeks' time, if Dr. Hines could report like he reported today, we anticipate that we'll be able to consider opening up beaches and, of course, the same thing, sporting activity. So hopefully, if we behave well and we get a good result, by the middle of October, we'll be considering those things. But let me just say something, Let us not get carried away. This is a huge step that we're taking here today. Huge in terms of increased movement and increased population activity and interpopulation contact. We have been picking up instances of the Delta variant in our population. In fact, some people might say, then why are you doing this? We are doing this because we are accepting that we have to live with the virus. We're living with the virus with a vaccination program and hoping for cooperation of the population. There are other countries that have gone well beyond us, and now the Delta virus is the version of the virus in their population. We are not going to say that if we begin to get affected by the Delta virus in any serious way, that the response is to say, oh God, hold your head and lock down the country again. We're not doing that. As long as the vaccination program is available, on the way, and we are responding to, and the vaccines are in fact helping with the fight of the virus, because so far, maybe Dr. Parasham might be able at this point to tell us how people are faring with the Delta virus and their vaccination program. Are the vaccines still useful against the Delta virus? And what are the dangers?
So I mean, we have 4 different types of vaccines in the country. I can say, in terms of the data that we have so far, all 4 vaccines are still safe and effective against the Delta variant to various levels. Of course, all of them will have different levels when you talk about effectiveness and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, from the data we have supporting all of them, they do give us a fair level of protection against the Delta variant as well as the other variants of concern. So I think, for example, we can use AstraZeneca, which gives you even still something upwards of 80% for hospitalization. There's a study from Sri Lanka which suggests that the Sinopharm vaccine, for example, gives you very similar levels of antibodies as related to even an active infection. So all of them provide you with a very good response still.
I just have one follow-up question. Given that we're over 6 months, Dr. Parashram, into our vaccination program, we're hearing scientists now saying that the efficacy of vaccines start to dip after 6 months. Any consideration for booster shots?
So again, it's variable. So you see Pfizer applying to WHO for a booster shot, right, for a 3rd shot. And the WHO, the Director General, has put out a statement saying that they have a moratorium on it until the end of the year for reasons of vaccine equity. But it does show from the data, it's suggestive that within 6 to 8 months, you're beginning to see a decline. Not that it disappears altogether, but for Pfizer, it begins to slow. So a booster shot 6 months after the 2nd dose is what is being recommended. Similar recommendations are coming for other vaccines, for example, Sinopharm. AstraZeneca seems to be having a very good long response. They haven't spoken about any boosters for AstraZeneca as yet. But I am sure as time goes by, if you have more and more variants, the need for vaccination vaccines to be developed in terms of boosters will arise for all of them possibly. And we see that with influenza year after year. You have one outbreak in one year, there's variations of that virus, and then the next year you have a different flu vaccine, right? It compensates. So it bears off with what we have seen with flu, that it may happen again for COVID, and the longer the pandemic draws on, the greater the likelihood that you'll need boosters.
But, Avashi, to join your question, our problem here in this country is not so much the issues surrounding the booster, because it's quite likely, or more than likely, that if we do get approvals to do boosters and we have vaccine to boost people, who are we going to boost? It will be the same people who have already taken the vaccine, and those who have not taken it will still be in the same situation as they are in now and were in before any vaccines were available. So really, our assignment here is to get as many people vaccinated as possible. And when boosters become adjudicated upon and vaccines are available for that, that will just flow into the program.
Dr. Rowley, my question was the, many-faceted shouting match over the Paul SC, Police Service Commission.
All right, so you ended the health part of the vaccine. We have another few minutes, yes, and you're going to do it?
So is it a concern to you if it's an imbroglio going on at the moment, or is there a process that you trust would resolve itself, if it's in law courts or the law of the land?
Both aspects are correct. One, as head of the country and as a citizen, I am very, very concerned and I'm attuned to the situation, and more importantly, I am part of the situation because as head of the National Security Council, as head of the government, as a member of parliament, I am in a very ticklish position, to use that balance. So yes, I am paying a lot of attention to it and have great interest in it. And you call it an imbroglio. Whatever it is, I still have confidence that our institutional arrangements will eventually work us out of this situation, and it will be adjudicated upon in the proper place, in the proper way, and where errors have been made, that they can be rectified without much more bacchanal. And there has been some loss of confidence, because that happens all the time. If your driver is taking you to Mova and you see him make a sudden pull on the steering wheel because he was gazing for a fraction of a second, it would have damaged your confidence. You start to wonder whether he could drive at all or whether you should be in his car at all. So confidence is interfered with by these developments. But I do have confidence that we can work our way out of it very quickly and relatively safely, but we wouldn't come out of it unscarred.
How do you respond to the assertion that there may be some political influence playing over the PNC?
Where is that coming from?
It's coming from pockets of the opposition and
Well,
some legal luminaries.
that is to be ignored. There are 1.4 million persons in this country, and the handful of people who have no moral authority to join this debate up front is the opposition. Because the opposition leader, who makes a career of denigrating people, jump out in front and trying to make this into what it is not. I can tell you, citizens, it is not what it is being made out to be. There is no political interference driving this process. There is no conspiracy of any particular school. What it is a serious conflicting set of legal opinions at different locations of the country's management. And of course, if you have all these gears moving at the same time, it is not surprising that a time like this, some of these gears would have been out of mesh. Most importantly, though, you would have seen, like I saw it in today's newspaper, that the government has conceded that errors have been made, or an error has been made within the process. And that have been identified. The government will not hammer home a position based on a premise that a wrong process is a right process.
Mr. Prime Minister, your response just now, you said you had confidence in these systems to work it out, and you had confidence that it will be worked out. Do you have confidence in the Police Service Commission and its members?
Well, I didn't say that. I said about institutions, and I mean, I'm not picking and choosing. A number of institutions are involved here, and they're required to interface. No institution is an island unto itself. This question of an independent, this and an independent that, there is an interfacing between the various institutions. And these matters that you all are raising openly or tongue-in-cheek, they're all in the court right now, all of them in the court. And the confidence I express is in the judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago. We have an independent judiciary, and as I use the word independent, that judiciary would look at the situation and adjudicate on the questions put to it, or the facts put before the bench, and I have confidence that our judicial officers will make decisions acknowledging that an error was made, as the government has done, and we didn't do so capriciously. We did so by seeking sound legal advice, because this is all a legal matter. It's entirely legal. It's not emotive, it's not racial, it's not school-based, and that is why I'm so disappointed that the opposition leader choose to go down that road. Because let me remind the opposition leader, when you talk about interference, interference is when you interface without good and proper reason. And none of that has happened by the political directorate, as far as I know. I lead the government, and the government has not improperly interface with any of these agencies. Right? We have interfaced, but not improperly. And I mean, for my colleagues, my political colleagues, just remember two names, Iwatsky and Gibbs. What level of interference caused them to be paid millions to leave this country when they were appointed to substantive positions, not even acting positions, substantive positions in this country? I went to Parliament one day, sat in my seat, to be told that these two fellas are gone and they've been paid millions to go, and they got the money and they left. So my colleague from Siparia has a habit of jumping on people and trying to denigrate them and call their character into question. And that is the thumb that points at me when you're pointing finger at other people. That is not helpful at all. As a matter of fact, we are all parliamentarians, and the error in this situation has to do with the parliament. And I would think it is easy for any parliamentarian, especially those who claim to have legal acumen, or those who take the time to get legal advice, as the government has done, to determine that this is not a matter that is insurmountable.
You always talk about how hard it is to get citizens to serve on various different boards, and within this entire scenario, we've seen the resignation of at least one member, and I mean, you even described him as a very sterling, he's well educated, you know, he's Mr. Courtney McNish. What does that mean to you to have somebody like that resign and cite a lack of confidence in PSC's chairman?
Well, there are days that make up the year. And it's not every day is a rainy day, not every day is a sunny day. Life is made up of days of changes. And if there are situations of change, it doesn't mean that tomorrow is hopeless. All we expect is that we'll all rise to the occasion. What more can I ask for? And I mean, the fact that someone has a position today, quite properly so, if they seem to think so. Whether you agree or don't agree, the bottom line is we have to go on aiming to do better, to try to avoid any similar situation in the future. But there's no guarantee that that wouldn't happen, because I'm sure you might have been probably too young or you're in the media when we made the change from a system where where the Prime Minister used to interface with the public service. Commission made a recommendation, and there was okay, if the Prime Minister wasn't happy for reason, he would then talk to the Commission will go again behind closed doors, and the country will get a Commission of Police. We as a country thought we had perfected that by changing it to this. What we didn't know, right, is that this situation is far worse than the one we try to fix. Far worse. But we can't please everybody with it. Governance in a country, even a mature country, is an evolving process. And we are evolving all the time. And these kinds of experiences, sometimes they contribute to that evolution.
Just a tiny thing, Prime Minister, when you spoke about your, going back a few sentences, when you spoke about you have confidence in an independent judiciary, you also said something, I have confidence an error was made. Do you remember just saying, I was just trying to think of what was this error?
I told you I saw in the papers today the details of the legal advice that the government got from eminent senior counsel. And that makes it quite clear what the situation is. And the government is not resisting that very seasoned and reasoned position, meaning that an error has been made, and that error can be and is to be rectified.
My final question, given this
Final question, thank you.
My final question, I don't know if you have it, but given this whole scenario, now, it surrounds, I don't know if to call him commissioner, acting commissioner, it surrounds Gary Griffith. If his name has made the order of merit list, it will be deliberated by you?
I would not, and that is precisely why I would not join that conversation at this time, except to say that at the Office of the Prime Minister, at the Office of the National Security Chairman and members, we don't deal with individuals in policy. We deal with institutions. Individuals are dealt with in a different way, at a different time, and maybe by others. This is not a matter for individuals to prevail over institutions at this time. Thank you very much. See you again soon, and I hope that the decisions we've taken today would see us to a better place. And before you go, please convey from me and my family and from my team in government, Happy Republic Day to all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. For the second year, we find ourselves in a pandemic, but the most important thing, we are in a better place than we were last year with respect to fighting this pandemic. Happy Republic Day.